All right, so hope everybody is doing all right today here on this Friday night. It is 10:49 Eastern time at the moment, so we're going to be breaking down the Saturday college basketball DFS slate. However, there's one teeny tiny issue is that DraftKings does not have the salaries up for the Saturday slate just yet. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do our best to give you all the information that you are going to need to play DFS for these games and to build lineups for these games and try to pick out the right players for these games without having the DraftKings salaries, which is going to be slightly difficult. So, in terms of visual aid, we're just going to be kind of looking at, box scores and stats and everything else as opposed to, actual like DraftKings game logs and DraftKings scoring and all that. So it's going to be a little bit different if you're watching on YouTube. It's definitely not going to be the same exact format that you were used to, but we're still going to get you guys all the information because I think at this point, I think we know enough about the early slate to kind of project all the games and understand what's going to happen on all those games. There's only one game in doubt here as I'm recording this, as we're live, that is not totally finished yet. Like I'm pretty certain Nebraska is going to end up beating Indiana. I think we can project the second Big Ten semifinal to include Nebraska. But the SEC game, Florida's up at the half, but I'm not sure if that's going to hold or not, especially the way Alabama scores points. So that would be the last game left. It's really going to affect this DraftKings early slate. And then, the night slate is a lot of games that are still up for grabs because there's still a lot of conference semifinals and quarterfinals going on all across the country. So if you guys are watching the games as you're watching this and, you get an update as to like, a team that's going to win or a team that's looking like they're going to win, put it in the chat. So that way I can know and we can go ahead and deep dive in and kind of get on with the rest of the slate. But we're just going to kind of break down what we know here on this slate. If you are here with us live, please go ahead, show me some support, hit that like button and hit the subscribe button to the channel as well. It helps me out a ton. We are closing in on our goal of 500 subscribers, which would be just a monumental goal considering we started YouTube less than a year ago. And I think it would be pretty impressive to get to that number in less than a year. And then hitting the like button, it helps you out so much. It helps the video get noticed, helps the channel get noticed. And I cannot say how much I appreciate it when you guys do that. It really does help me out a ton. And if you're sitting here watching live and you got any questions, any ideas, any plays, any leans, anything in the chat, just let me know because this is you guys' time as well as my time. So, I'm here to help you guys. That's the whole goal of doing this is to get you guys the information that you need to build successful lineups. And, I've got TV going in my living room as I'm recording this in the dining room. So I've got a little bit of a pulse as to what's going on in the rest of college basketball because I've got some sweats going on DraftKings right now. I am currently near the top in both the quarter jukebox, the dime time, and the high five. So we will see if that ends up holding because there's a lot of basketball left to be played. But definitely interested to see how the rest of this Friday night plays out and definitely looking forward to this Saturday slate. I think conference championship weekend is one of the best weekends in all of sports because of just the pure drama around the conference tournaments in college basketball. I love it. So I'm definitely looking forward to this slate. And so we're going to go ahead and get started breaking down this slate. I'm going to go ahead and set up the audio feed real quick. So that way everybody who listens to the audio is able to do so when the audio gets uploaded because the audio will probably be finished right when we get done with this. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we're going to go ahead and get rolling. Like I said, guys, if you got anything that you want to talk about, any plays, any ideas, whatever, put it in the chat and we're going to go ahead and get rolling. All right, so game number one of the slate is going to be the first A10 semifinal. The A10 tournament, y'all, has been just absolute bonkers. It's the top four seeds have all lost. Richmond, Loyola, Dayton, and UMass. So just absolutely nuts that none of the teams left are, seeded any better than 5. Like I can't recall the last time I saw that happen in a conference. Now, VCU is the first team that we're going to talk about because they're in this first semifinal and they are taking on St. Joe's. St. Joe's as the 9 seed, VCU as the 5 seed. KenPom has this one projected to be 71-70 in favor of VCU for 141 point total, which is not the highest on the slate, but certainly not going to be the lowest on the slate either. This is a rematch of a game that was played earlier this season with VCU winning it 73-69. So 142 point total in that game is not terrible at all. This is a definite contrast in styles. So VCU, they're used to being like the Havoc team, right? Back when they had Shaka Smart, back when they had Will Wade, they were a team that would press and get up and down and run and gun. They are not that anymore under Ryan Odom. They rank 297th in the nation in tempo, whereas St. Joe's plays actually a little bit faster. St. Joe's has also gone to a little bit more of a small ball starting lineup. More on that in a second. St. Joe's ranks 111th in tempo, so a little bit of a contrast in styles, but neither of these two teams are really going to like super look to push the pace, which is why you get kind of like a middling total. Now for VCU, we got to talk about who was good for them in their last game against St. Joe's. So in the last game against St. Joe's, Joe Bamasil and Toby Lawal led the team in scoring. They both had 16 points each off the bench. They actually were the two usage leaders for them in this game as well. They didn't play a ton of minutes, but because they did come off the bench, but they were the leading scorers. And it is not shocking to see Joe Bamasil lead this team in scoring. He actually has the highest usage rate out of anybody on the team over the course of the season because he doesn't play a super big minute total, only 22 per game and change, but he does do a lot of scoring, a lot of facilitating while he's out there. So he actually is a guy that I'm definitely very interested in. I'm very curious to see what his price tag comes in at. If he's a 5K play, I think he's definitely in play. Now, Max Shulga also had a decent amount of success in the first game against St. Joe's because of his peripheral stats. You know, he's a guy that he is VCU's leading scorer at 14.6, but he also averages over 4 rebounds and over 3 assists per game. He's a guy who can really fill up the stat sheet, and he was able to hit value in that first game against St. Joe's because of his ability to fill up that stat sheet. In my opinion, Shulga is their best all-around player. But what we got to talk about is how in the A10 tournament, VCU has condensed their rotation a little bit. So we talked about this all week long in conference tournament season. As you get to these conference tournament games and, you know, tournament lives are on the line, seasons are on the line, coaches are going to play their best players and they're going to go down swinging with their best as opposed to, you know, some guys that they're trying to develop or some guys that they're trying to get experience in minutes. No, this is the time where they're going to put their best 5 on the floor as much as humanly possible. So in the A10 tournament, they kind of blew out UMass a little bit. So I'm not going to look too deep into the minute totals for that game, but in a close game against Fordham, Fordham almost upset them in the first round of the A10 tournament. They only played 7 guys double-digit minutes. It was the starters of Shulga, Jackson, and Bairstow at the guard position. And then the 2 forwards were Kuwani and Fermin that started. But really, they play a 3-big rotation with Kuwani, Fermin, and Lawal rotating in. And they'll play a lot with Bairstow at the 4 if they only have one of those 2 bigs in the game. And then Joe Bamasil was the only other guy that really came off the bench and did any kind of contributing. So with this being a little bit of a shorter rotation, it definitely makes these guys a little more attractive. I definitely think that they're going to play a little bit more minutes. We've talked about Zeb Jackson when VCU has been on the slate, that really when Shulga and Bamasil and Bairstow are all healthy, Jackson is kind of like the fourth wheel, even though that doesn't really work as a metaphor because, you know, their cars have 4 wheels, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like he's kind of the guy who gets left out, who doesn't get his, you know, fair share of the pie when Shulga, Bamasil, and Bairstow are all active. But in the A10 tournament, Jackson's been pretty good. He's been playing a ton of minutes. He's been taking a lot of shots. So I definitely wouldn't mind going with any of the 4 guards that VCU has been playing. When it comes to the bigs, I don't really know what to make of them. They don't ever play like big minute totals. They really rotate quite evenly. Lawal was the guy who was the most effective in the first game against St. Joe's. Lawal, just based off the eye test to me, is also the best one of the 3. So he would probably get more of my interest than Kuwani or Fermin. But I do think that's a situation that you can just totally avoid and be okay with it. Now, on the other side of this game, you have the St. Joe's Hawks. So I'm going to try to find them here on ESPN. So for St. Joe's, they are a little bit of an interesting team to look at because they have a guy. I ended up on the women's page on ESPN. How did I do that? So they are a team that has switched up their starting lineup in recent weeks. The good news is that they did play with this lineup when they went up against VCU, so we do have an accurate picture of what that looks like. So in the first meeting, their leading scorer, Eric Reynolds, was the guy who led them in pretty much everything offensively. He led them in scoring, he led them in shot attempts, he led them in usage, and he put up 21 and 4 in that game. He's one of the best scorers in the A10. He's a guy who can absolutely get buckets. And so I'm not surprised to see that, and I really think that as they continue through this tournament run, he's going to be a guy that they're really going to live or die with because he is their best offensive player. Now, Xavier Brown also had a really good performance. He ended with 24 points in that game on less shots than Eric Reynolds, on less usage than Eric Reynolds. He had a really hot shooting night. He's not a bad option. What we're going to talk about here with this, the way that they've changed this lineup, I think that there's a chance that both of the Browns, Xavier and Cameron, do come in overpriced. So what they have been doing is they have gone to a really small ball lineup with Rasheer Fleming playing at the 5. I think he's more of a true 4 than a 5, but really it creates a lineup that is really athletic, can really space the floor, and Fleming is a really entertaining watch. He's kind of like a worse Zion Williamson would be my comparison. He's really athletic. He's got surprisingly good handles for a guy his size, and he does some things every game you watch him where it's just like, whoa. Like he's not always like that, but like he will just have some really good highlight plays, and I like him as a player. So what they've done since they've gone this small ball lineup is they played Lynn Greer at the 1, Eric Reynolds at the 2, the Browns, Xavier and Cameron as the wings, the 3 and the 4, and then Rasheer Fleming at the 5. Now, Rasheer Fleming in that first game against VCU was second on the team in usage behind Eric Reynolds, but he only played 20 minutes due to getting in foul trouble. But what I like about this is with this new small ball lineup and with it being conference tournament season, a guy in Fleming who averages 26 minutes a game has now played in over 30 minutes in both conference tournament games that St. Joe's has played so far because they really know that they need him out there on the floor. And I got to say that really elevates his ceiling if we think we're going to get 30 minutes out of him. And I don't really see a reason why he would need to get in foul trouble because the bigs for VCU really do not draw a lot of fouls. And if he's playing the 5, he's going to be matched up on the bigs as opposed to maybe a small ball lineup that has Bairstow at the 4. So I think this is a really, really good matchup for Rasheer Fleming. Trying to guess the price coming in, if he comes in at about 6,200, I would consider him a really good play. I think he's going to come in at about 6,700 though. And that would make me question it a little bit. If he's above 7K, I'm probably out on him, but I really like what he's been doing lately. I really like the boosted minutes. I really like what this lineup has done for his game. And like I said, all those starting 5 are playing huge minutes now. So if they come in at a reasonable price tag, I'm probably going to pull the trigger on one or more of those guys in this St. Joe starting lineup. Now on to game number 2. So game number 2, according to DraftKings, from what they've got on the slate so far, is the first semifinal in the SEC between Mississippi State and Auburn. So Mississippi State is projected to lose this game 76-69, according to KenPom. These teams did play twice this season, so we do have a little bit of a sample size to go by. The most recent time that these two teams played, that there was 78-63 in favor of Auburn. The further back,
only loss was to Kentucky, and that game wasn't 10 days ago.
In favor of Mississippi State. So a little bit of a disparity in game environments there. Neither was really like a super duper shootout game that you really have to go out of your way to target. And neither of these teams are really going to get in shootout games a whole lot. You know, Mississippi State ranks 197th in tempo and 20th in defensive efficiency. Auburn ranks 57th in tempo and 5th in defensive efficiency. So you've got two really good defensive teams here in this game. Now, in the game that they won, the game that Mississippi State won, Cameron Matthews was the hero. He had 14, 11, 2 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. It just absolutely filled up the stat sheet. That was in the period of time where he was really seeing more usage than Toulouse Smith and was a better fantasy player than Toulouse Smith for about 2 weeks of the season. And now it's kind of leveled back out since then. In the game that they won also, Josh Hubbard did lead the team in shots, but that's not uncommon. He has a super high shot rate. In the game that Auburn won, the more recent one, this is the one that we're looking at on YouTube, Hubbard and Toulouse Smith were the only 2 guys that were above 25% usage in the game. They were also the only 2 guys who saw more than double-digit points scored. So just 2 guys here that really in that second matchup against Auburn dominated the offense, dominated the usage, and they're really the main 2 guys that you have to consider for this Mississippi State team. However, the one good thing I will say about Mississippi State, though, is that like a lot of other teams in conference tournament play, they're really, really condensing their rotation, and it's making their guys a whole lot more attractive to play from a DFS perspective. So even in this game against Tennessee, that was a little bit of a blowout, they did not play any bench player more than 17 minutes. They only played, 32 plus 12, 44 total bench minutes in this game against Tennessee. So they are really letting those starters ride. All 4 of the 5 starters played 30 or more minutes. Toulouse Smith was honestly objectively bad against Tennessee. And I don't know. I kind of think that's the not the norm for Toulouse. He generally is their best player, but hopefully that'll drive his price tag down a little bit in DFS. And the downside is, though, is the Auburn's not really a good matchup against centers, so I don't think this is the best spot for Toulouse Smith. But if we do get him at a depressed price tag, I'm certainly not going to complain. But the other 4 starters, Matthews, Jeffries, Davis, and Hubbard, all played more than 30 minutes. They all have to be in play in DFS for that reason. Deshaun Davis has been a very popular value play over the last week or so because he is playing a ton of minutes and he's seeing just enough shots, doing just enough with the peripheral stats that he is a fantasy viable player in the 5K range. So he's a guy that I'm probably going to be going back to here on this Saturday slate. Also worth noting, in today's game against Tennessee, Josh Hubbard did lead them in shots yet again by 5. He was the only guy who took double-digit shots, had a 24% usage rate in this game, and so I definitely think that he is a guy that you can consider as well. Just any time you have a guy that's leading their team in shots by that much, he's a guy that you have to consider in DFS because you know the opportunities are going to be there. Now, on the Auburn side, they're a little bit different. They're a very difficult team to figure out. So for Auburn, they won today by about 30 over South Carolina. And in that game, they really rested their starters. But this is no real shock because Auburn plays a ton of bench minutes anyway, but they really rested their starters. There was not a guy on Auburn's team who played more than 25 minutes. That's just something that doesn't normally happen in college basketball. So the fact that they were able to rest their starters means that we don't really get a good sample of information to look at to see if they are going to condense their rotation, because this is a team that in DFS, targeting them will be a heck of a lot easier if they condense their rotation because they play a ton of guys. There's a ton of guys who see double-digit minutes. The starters don't always see a ton of minutes. They're just a really hard team to target like this. And I was hoping that we would get one game of a sample size, one game of information to know whether or not they're going to be condensing their rotation in the SEC tournament. And we did not get to find that out because they beat the brakes off of South Carolina and were able to rest their starters in the second half. Now, in this game against South Carolina, though, what I do want to point out is Janai Broome was utterly dominant. He was the one that played 25 minutes, and if Janai Broome gets to 30 minutes, odds are he's going to smash, because pretty much the only thing that has been limiting his ceiling this entire season have been his low minute totals. In this game against South Carolina, he only needed 25 minutes to smash. He put up 18 points, 10 boards in 25 minutes. And so if you kind of extrapolate that out to like a 30-minute total, and he does in fact play 30 minutes or more, this is a guy who is definitely going to be an option in DFS, probably one of the better plays of the slate. And oh, by the way, in the 2 games against Mississippi State this season, one of Auburn's big men, whether it's Broome or Jalen Williams, has had a 30% usage rate in that game. Broome had one game at 30%. Jalen Williams had another game at 30%. So Auburn was clearly very comfortable playing through the bigs 2 times against Mississippi State. So I definitely think they could do that again. I just wish we knew if they were going to get a ton of minutes, but we really can't project that. Auburn's guards minutes and usage is kind of all over the place. The starters recently have been Holloway, Jones, and Baker Mazzara. So if they do end up condensing their rotation, those would be the 3 that it would condense around. Baker Mazzara has been outstanding recently. He's a guy who can really fill up the stat sheet, and he's been taking more and more shots as the season's gone on. Denver Jones was a great player at FIU last year, was a high usage player there. So he's a guy that like has the ability to carry an offense and has the ability to be a high usage player. Aiden Holloway is a freshman that I've liked ever since I watched him play against Baylor, but he just hasn't really ever been that good since then. But I feel like the potential is there. I feel like he's a decent GPP dart throw as long as he's coming in the 4K range. All right, so that does it for game number 2. So I'm going to go ahead and take a quick breather. If there is any thoughts that you guys have on that game, on the first 2 games, drop it in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and snip the audio here, so that way the audio folks will have something to listen to. And then we're going to go ahead and look ahead at game number 3 here on this slate after I take a swig of Gatorade. All right. I'm not going to lie to y'all. I would have thought that, I'm a high school math teacher, so I'm actually used to like getting up and like talking all day long, but it's kind of hard to go like an hour straight because usually I'm calling on kids or I'm giving them time to think, giving them time to work. It'll kind of wear down on your voice a little bit if you're just going straight, straight all the way through. So anyway, let's go ahead and pick things back up. And let's go ahead and pick things back up with game number 3, which is going to be the first of 2 Big Ten semifinals between Purdue and Wisconsin. So Purdue is the 1 seed in the Big Ten Conference. They are the best team in this Big Ten Conference, in my opinion. Ken Palm has this game projected to be 78-72 in favor of Purdue. Purdue had swept the season series. They beat Wisconsin 75-69. And then on the last day of the regular season, they beat Wisconsin 78-70. So Purdue clearly having the advantage between the two in the two times that they have played. Now, for Wisconsin, here's what makes them interesting. AJ Storr had a 30% usage rate or higher in both games against Purdue. And he had a 29% usage rate against Northwestern today. Here's the deal with AJ Storr, though. We've talked about this time and time again all season long. He's a guy who takes a ton of shots, and he's a good enough scorer, right? But the story of his fantasy day is going to come down to whether or not he gives you something in the peripheral stats. And today, he pretty much scored so much that he didn't need to get a whole lot of peripheral stats to end up putting through value, but he did anyway, and he ended up north of 40 fantasy points. He was a guy that was on some of my best lineups on the Friday slate, because you know that this eruption is there for him if he just has a good peripheral stat day, right? And so I do think he's intriguing again for this game because of the usage that they showed with him, leading the team in shots taken both times against Purdue this season. Definitely like the upside of AJ Storr. Now, Stephen Crowell was Wisconsin's second best offensive player today behind AJ Storr. But man, he's been awful both games against Purdue. He did not score in that meeting on the last day of the regular season. 0 points, 2 boards, 1 assist, 1 steal, 5 fouls in 21 minutes. And this is like the Zach Edey effect, right? This is what happens to conventional centers when they play Zach Edey and their team doesn't double. They don't, try to go small. They don't try to do anything creative. They just leave one guy on an island against Edey. That's what's going to happen. And so Stephen Crowell is a guy that I genuinely have zero interest in here on this slate. However, I will preface it with this, though. And this is the phrase that you guys that have been to the channel multiple times know this. Sometimes in DFS, a bad play becomes a good play when everybody thinks they're a bad play. And so Stephen Crowell is a guy who has legitimate 40 fantasy point upside. And because of the matchup and because of the history, he's probably going to be supremely low owned. If you want to take that chance and you're playing GPPs, you're not going to get a lower owned Stephen Crowell on a slate. Whether or not he actually has a chance of scoring 40 fantasy points in this game, that's up for you to decide. But he's going to be super low owned. Tyler Wall is the guy for this Wisconsin team that is going to be highly owned. He had over 40 fantasy points in both games against Purdue earlier this season. Just, I think, a great option against this Purdue team. He matches up really well against their power forwards, clearly from what he's done against them the first 2 times. So he is a guy that I think you definitely have to have a little bit of interest in. Now, what is really interesting with Wisconsin, though, is in the game against Northwestern today, they played it without Chucky Hepburn. It was kind of out of nowhere. I didn't really see anything about his injury before the game. But what they did was, with Chucky Hepburn not playing, they moved John Blackwell into the starting lineup and they let Max Klesmit run the 1. And Max Klesmit did a pretty good job of running the 1. He ended up with 7 assists today against Northwestern. And if they keep him, DraftKings keeps him in the 5K price range, and we have news that Chucky Hepburn is out, I think Klesmit makes for a really intriguing play just because of the role that he has been given. Now, Blackwell struggled a little bit. He only played 24 minutes, was 1 for 8 from the field, dealt with foul trouble. He fouled out, only had 3 points. But this is a guy who's looked really good over the last month of the season. This is a guy who was outplaying Max Klesmit over the last month of the season. So I think that there is definitely some upside with Blackwell. You just need to end up having him not get in foul trouble and just end up having the ability to reach his ceiling because he plays 30-plus minutes. Now, on the Purdue side, let's go ahead and talk about this one. So Zach Edey really dominated both games against Wisconsin this season, but who doesn't Zach Edey dominate against, right? In both the games this year against Wisconsin, he had 18 and 13 in their first meeting, and then had 25 and 14, along with 3 blocks in their second meeting on the last day of the regular season. So with Edey, I've mentioned this a few times, he generally doesn't produce GPP winning scores. Today, the Friday slate, when they played Michigan State, he might have, depending on which GPP you're referring to, but he generally doesn't because he's priced at such a point that he generally is priced out of having them, right? Well, with going up against Wisconsin, a matchup that he's clearly had a lot of success against, if he's under 11K, I think you have to consider him, and I think you have to consider him even in GPPs, the opportunity to put 5x value up, with a salary that starts with a 10 instead of an 11. And if you're playing cash, I think he's a very easy cash game play because of the ability that he's shown to just dominate this Wisconsin team. Definitely like Zach Edey here in this matchup. Now, he had 29 points today, by the way. The fantasy total eludes me right now because I don't have DraftKings to pull up. Thanks, DraftKings. But he did have 29 real points against Michigan State. Now, Brayton Smith really struggled today against Michigan State. He only had 5 points in 26 minutes after dealing with first half foul trouble. Just not the performance you were looking for from him. However, the good news is if you're trying to back Brayton Smith, he actually took more shots than Zach Edey in that last game against Wisconsin last week. So he's definitely a guy that I would consider as well. He's a high upside guard in the 8K range. Definitely would not mind going with Brayton Smith. Fletcher Lawyer killed me today. I had a lot of Fletcher Lawyer against Michigan State. He had 3 straight games of 24 fantasy points or more. And today he decided that he was a member of the Gabe Cupps Memorial Cardio Club. Can you call something a memorial if a guy's still living? I don't know, but Gabe Cupps is the king of the cardio club, and Fletcher Lawyer joined it today. He had a big 3 in the second half, but that was really like all he did. Super disappointing fantasy total. But I definitely think you can go back to him because he has shown the ability to have 5 and 6x upside games. And as have Lawyer, we're talking about Lawyer, as have Jones, as have Kaufman, Wren, and Gillis, but just they're guys that you play as one-offs and GPPs and hope that they end up going off. All right, so looking at the chat, I see the comment from Ryan. Appreciate it, my man. Really glad that you like the content. Yeah, there were some definite odd scores today. The Alejandro Vasquez ejection, that was something. I wasn't watching that game live, but I caught the clip on Twitter, and I definitely did not think that warranted an ejection, but I guess by the letter of the law, that's kind of what they have to do. And that's actually a great segue because now we can go right into talking about the UAB Blazers and Alejandro Vasquez, right? So they are going to be playing South Florida. South Florida, the surprising 1 seed in the AAC, and UAB is playing them in this first semifinal in the AAC. The second semifinal
that's a rare miss there.
I'm hoping it ends up being Charlotte's. That way, Charlotte on a slate because I have plenty of thoughts on Charlotte. So while we're here, let's go ahead and talk about UAB and South Florida, though. KenPom has this game projected to be 76-72 in favor of USF. The first meeting between these two teams was a 75-71 win in favor of UAB. South Florida only lost 2 games in conference play all season long. Charlotte couldn't beat them. FAU couldn't beat them. Memphis couldn't beat them. UAB did. UAB beat them in the second game of conference play. Now, in that first meeting for UAB, Yaxel Landeborg was great. He's been great for UAB all season long. He's a really athletic power forward who gets a ton of rebounds, draws a ton of fouls, and he had 23 and 15 in that first game against South Florida. South Florida is not exactly a team that is built to handle like hosses down low. They're a very spacing, athleticism, 5-out kind of team. And I think that Landeborg has a chance to have a big day for that reason. South Florida is not a great defensive rebounding team. So I really do like Landeborg. 43 fantasy points today in the game that they played. So I definitely wouldn't mind going back to him and kind of running it back. He was 9,500 on the Friday slate for DraftKings. And I think that that's a totally reasonable price. If his price stays below 10K, I'm going to be all over Yaxel Landeborg. Now, while we're here, we can go ahead and talk about the rest of today. So we've got the aforementioned Alejandro Vasquez ejection that happened 5 minutes into the game. He did have 17 points off the bench in the first meeting between UAB and USF. Here's what I am hoping, though. So we know that the ejection does not carry over into Saturday's game. We know that. So he's going to be active. He's going to be playing. What I'm hoping, and DraftKings has been asleep at the wheel on this sometimes because their algorithm only sees 5 minutes and 4 fantasy points or whatever it was. I'm hoping that their algorithm prices him down. because he's a guy that has been a big-time usage guy for them this season. And since he moved into the starting lineup, he's a guy that's been playing big-time minutes. The only reason he didn't play big-time minutes against Wichita was because he got ejected. And guess what? That just means he's going to have fresh legs. He's not playing a true back-to-back like these other guys are. So I definitely do like Vasquez, and I think if he's at an affordable price tag, probably 5,500 or less, I think he's going to be a great play here on this Saturday slate. Now, what that did, his ejection in this game, it led to significantly more shots for Ephraim Johnson and Eric Gaines and significantly more minutes from Daniel Ortiz. Now, Eric Gaines did cash it in. He ended up with 38 fantasy points in this game today against Wichita. However, a large part of that was the fact that he had 7 combined steals and blocks. That's a lot of fantasy points off of not a lot of offense. So definitely do think that, the Vasquez ejection definitely bumped up Gaines a little bit. The defensive stats bumped up Gaines a little bit. I don't think you can rely on that to be super duper reliable. Ephraim Johnson, he had a ton of usage, led the team in shot attempts without Vasquez, but man, he didn't turn it into a whole lot. Only had 11 and 1, no assists, steals, or blocks. So a little bit of a disappointing stat line for Ephraim Johnson to only end with 11 fantasy points when he had a prime opportunity to end it with a lot. Daniel Ortiz ended with 26 fantasy points off the bench. But again, I think he saw boosted minutes because of the Vasquez ejection. So I'm probably not going back to Ortiz for that reason, because I think, DraftKings, the way their algorithm works, they're going to bump up Ortiz. So I'm probably not going to go back to a guy at a high price tag where it's coming off of something that we know is not sustainable. Now, another thing that's interesting with UAB, though, is I kind of buried the lead a little bit here. Christian Coleman moved into the starting lineup ahead of Javian Davis. So if you had been following AAC basketball, which if you're playing DraftKings is every now and then they put AAC games on the slate, Christian Coleman had been better than Javian Davis over the last month of the season. Just straight better. A straight better in fantasy, straight better on actual floor production. And so it was a deserved move into the starting lineup to give him that starting spot. He ended with 25 minutes, ended up with 25 fantasy points in those 25 minutes, played at a 31% usage rate, taking 12 shots. That was more shots than Lindenborg got. So I really do like Christian Coleman. If he stays below 6K, he is going to be a big-time play for me as well here on this slate on the UAB side. Now, let's talk South Florida, though. So for South Florida, let's see if I can – I thought the back button would take me right to them. So let's see for South Florida what they got. So the big news for them in their game – today, it's referring to Friday, was the fact that they switched up their starting lineup and they moved Corey Walker Jr. into the starting lineup over Kayshawn Pryor. Kayshawn Pryor is probably like their second best player. So it was a little bit of a surprising move, but they've done it before. They generally start Walker when they play a team who plays 2 traditional bigs or play a team who just has some bigger bodies down low to deal with. And so I think that could potentially happen here against UAB with dealing with Lindenborg and Coleman. I could see Walker starting. The only downside is that Walker starting, he only played 13 minutes. He only turned it into about 14 fantasy points. Forgot to add in the steals and the blocks. So 14 fantasy points in 13 minutes from Walker. Not terrible, but not going to win you anything either. Kayshawn Pryor coming off the bench ended up with 22 minutes and put up a double-double in those 22 minutes, put up 34 fantasy points in 22 minutes. That's over 1.5 points per minute. That's an absolutely outstanding pace. And if he's going to keep that pace up, he's going to continue to be a really solid option day in and day out. And I do think it's going to be interesting to see how these 2 forwards, Walker and Pryor, deal with the UAB bigs, because the UAB bigs are, in my opinion, better than the ECU bigs were today. Now, in the game today, Kobe Knox was their leading scorer. That doesn't always happen. He had 17 and 6, ended with 29 fantasy points. He was actually outscored in fantasy points by Brandon Stroud, who got there big time due to peripheral stats, had 7 rebounds and 8 assists. So definitely wouldn't mind going back to Brandon Stroud. I think what he did is a little more sustainable than what Kobe Knox did, just because we've seen Kobe Knox have these kind of oscillating totals. Stroud is a guy who can get there with his rebounds and assists. And then both we just mentioned Knox had 29 fantasy points. Where is he? Selton Miguel right here. Their 6th man ended with 29 fantasy points also. Played 24 minutes, put up 17 real points in 29 fantasy points. Look, that's what he does. He is a super high usage player that comes off the bench. And so with that, you are going to get a lot of variance with him. You never know how many minutes he's going to play, how many shots he's going to take, but you do know that the usage is going to be there and a decent minute total is going to come your way. Selt Miguel is not a bad option, but I would prefer to play a guy who's been consistent like Youngblood or Brandon Stroud. Youngblood kind of was a disappointment today. He ended with 17 fantasy points, which is not great. It's definitely not his normal total, but he only played 23 minutes for whatever reason. I'm guessing it was because of first half foul trouble. I did not get to watch all of this game, so I don't know what happened there, but I'm definitely wanting to go back to Youngblood just because I do think he is their best player, and I do think that the performance today, if anything, it'll downgrade his price just a little bit. All right, so we're going to take another quick breather while we go ahead and take a look to these last few games. And go ahead and give myself a drink. All right, looking at the chat. Ryan, I see your comment. Definitely thank you for pointing out that Cam Spencer thing. Pretty much, yeah, I was surprised to see him come in that low owned. Definitely ended up being a great play. St. John's has been a defense that you can really target a lot. And to see the fact that a lot of the UConn guys went low owned today was kind of surprising, honestly. But definitely something that if you were able to latch onto those UConn guys and play them, definitely something that paid big time dividends, especially Tristan Newton and Cam Spencer. And then Smarty, appreciate it, man. I'm definitely glad to have you join the Discord, which is a great segue right now because I've seen you in the Discord. So the Fantasy Corner Discord is something that I cannot recommend enough. I think we have the best free college basketball Discord that you can find anywhere. Pretty much, if you are looking for people to talk college basketball DFS with, if you're looking for people to bounce ideas off of, talk plays, talk strategy, the Fantasy Corner Discord is for you. We've got a lot of smart people who won a lot of money playing college basketball DFS this season, and we chop it up in there all day long, talking plays, talking strategy. And there's a lot of really good nuggets that get dropped in there. I cannot recommend it enough. If you want to join that Discord, you want to join that community, I really do think it can help you out. And there's a lot of good people and a lot of very smart people in there. And it's just an absolute blast to sweat it out together. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the last regularly scheduled game on the slate for now. We're still waiting the results of a few more games, but we do have one more game that is regularly scheduled for the Saturday main slate. So the last game of the Saturday main slate is going to be Duquesne taking on St. Bonaventure. And if you had this game in your A10 tournament bracket, then I hope you put some money on it, because that would have paid a lot of money to pick Duquesne to beat Dayton and St. Bonaventure to beat Loyola Chicago. Now, these two teams have played this season. Duquesne swept the season series 54-50 and then 75-69. Duquesne was actually without one of their best players in the game against St. Bonaventure, where they won 54-50. So they really slowed the game down. They really didn't have a lot of depth. And that's why that game had such a low total. But I wouldn't expect this game to have a very high total, 69-68. No matter who is playing in the later games, this is probably going to be the lowest total of the slate. You look at the game that they played against St. Bonaventure the second time, that was only 75-69. The Bonnies play at the 288th fastest tempo in the nation, and then Duquesne plays at the 246th fastest tempo in the nation. So you're not really getting either team that plays super fast right here, just not a team that plays fast at all. Now, in the game against Duquesne, one thing that is worth noting for the St. Bonaventure side is that Charles Pride led the team in scoring both times they played. He is a guy who generally doesn't take a ton of shots, generally doesn't have a high usage rate. He is generally an elite wing rebounder who is efficient from the floor and takes smart shots. And to see him lead the team, well, he didn't lead the team in shot attempts. Michael Adams-Woods had him edged out by 1. But to see him take 13 shots and lead the team in scoring, that's pretty impressive for Charles Pride. And I think that's a really good sign of what Charles Pride can do in DFS tomorrow. I generally think he comes in a little overpriced because he doesn't take a ton of shots. And so because he doesn't take a ton of shots, that limits his upside generally. But when he played Duquesne, he did take a ton of shots. So I think that's going to be something worth going to. The fact that you could get Charles Pride at a time where he's taking a ton of shots. Now, also St. Bonaventure, this is a team that is also condensing their rotation, which we talked about, numerous times with numerous teams on this slate. In the most recent game against Loyola Chicago, it's worth noting this was a double overtime game. So guys had an opportunity to play more than 40 minutes, and 4 guys played more than 40 minutes. Charles Pride was one of them. Micah Adams-Woods was one of them. Daryl Banks was one of them off the bench. And then Asa Asamvo also played 45 minutes. So there's just plenty of opportunities for those 4 guys to play a ton of minutes in this game here against Duquesne. And if those guys are the guys that are playing a lot, then there's definitely opportunities for all 4 of them to score fantasy points. Micah Adams-Woods is generally a pretty big-time shooter. He did have 13, 7, and 2 in this game against Loyola. Not a bad stat line by any stretch. That means curious as to see what is going to happen with his pricing. And then Daryl Banks III was kind of the hero of the Loyola game. Had 22 points, was 12 for 12 from the line, hit a lot of big free throws down the stretch. And for a little guard, going in there and getting 8 rebounds is big. So I'm going to be interested to see where Banks and Adams-Woods and Pride come in at for pricing. But I'm definitely interested in all 3 of them. And I think Asamvo, if he's going to play 35, 40 minutes, he's going to be a guy who's got a little bit of intrigue for me as well. The bigs for St. Bonaventure really rotated in this game. Chad Venning is the starter. He only played 16 minutes. Noah Brown played 20, and Barry Evans played 21. Venning, I think, is the best of the 3 of them. He generally plays at the highest usage rate of the 3 of them. But if he's going to be a part of this, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rotation, then it's going to be really hard for him to get a lot of upside, in my opinion. So I do like Chad Venning as a player, but I don't necessarily know if it's the best spot to play him in DFS if he's going to be playing this even rotation. Now for Duquesne, they're an interesting squad. So everything they do goes through their 2 guards, and that is Day Grant and Jimmy Clark. They are their 2 best players. Both over the course of the season have a 24% usage rate and a 27% shot rate. Against Dayton, they had the highest usage rate of anybody who played more than 10 minutes. More on that in a second. And so those 2 guys are the guys that you're going to want to target. If anybody from Duquesne is going to hit value, it's probably likely going to be Jimmy Clark and Day Grant. I'm curious as to see where they're going to be priced, though. Grant generally takes a little more shots. Clark generally does a little more with the peripherals. So it is going to be kind of interesting to see how they end up playing out. But those 2 guys are the guys that you're going to want to focus your efforts on. Jake DeMichael also plays a ton of minutes. He's kind of just like a 3-and-D guy. But if you're giving me a guy, especially I believe the last time he was on a slate, he was in the 4K range. If you're giving me a guy in the 4K range, hopefully, is playing 30-plus minutes and is going to be taking some shots, I definitely have a little bit of interest in Jake DeMichael as well. But I do think that those 3 Duquesne guys are going to be my primary interest for Grant, Clark, and DeMichael. Now, against Dayton, they played 3 guys at the center position: Dusan Mahorcic, Fousseyni Drame, and David Dixon. David Dixon is the best of them offensively. I've watched enough Duquesne basketball this season to know he's their best offensive big. But the reason why he only played 10 minutes against Dayton is because he fouled out. He fouled out in 10 minutes. It was almost comical watching. Like, Deron Holmes just kept going right at him, and he just kept getting a little bit over aggressive, a little bit over physical, and they just kept calling fouls. And he'd come in and he'd pick up the foul, and he'd go right back to the bench, and he'd come back in and he'd pick up the foul, and he'd go right back to the bench. Like, it was honestly almost comical because you knew it when it happened that, like, he was fouling at an insane rate. So if Dixon is able to play more minutes, he's an interesting play. He's a guy that plays at a high usage rate. He's a great fantasy point per minute player, but the fact that he fouls so much makes him a very volatile play. But he's definitely a guy that could be a little bit interesting in GPPs because bigs have had some success against St. Bonaventure. Philip Alston of Loyola had a really big game against them in the A10 tournament. Deron Holmes of Dayton had a big game against them as well. So definitely have a little bit of interest in David Dixon if he can stay out of foul trouble. All right, so that does it for the last regularly scheduled game, but I do have a little bit more information to get to. I am looking at the chat, though, Ryan. To answer your question, yes, in the Fantasy Corner Discord, we've got all sports covered in there. I generally specialize in the college basketball and the golf chats, and then college football when college football season pops up. But there's an NBA chat, there's an MLB chat. There's some guys who play Counter-Strike DFS that's their thing, and they're pretty good at it. I've never dabbled in it, but they do have some winners in there. But if you're playing DFS for any sport, I really do recommend it. It's a great community to be a part of. Now, one game that I do think we can say for certain now is that Nebraska is going to be in the second Big Ten semifinal against Illinois. As it stands, they are, or has that game gone final? Yes, that game has gone final. So Indiana will play in the second Big Ten semifinal game against Illinois. Those two teams played earlier this season, and it was 84-87. Or I worded that poorly. 87-84 in favor of Illinois. So this is a game that is probably going to get up and down. Nebraska looked really good offensively from what I saw in the Indiana game. They put up 93 points on them. So, these are two teams that are coming in with a lot of offensive success, and there's going to be fireworks in this game. In the first meeting between these two teams, Keizé Tominaga got red hot, had 31 points. And so he's a guy that we've talked about a few times over the course of the season. He is a guy that has the ability to get scorching hot from behind the arc. And if he does, you're going to want him in your lineup. I definitely think he's a really solid option for that reason. Bryce Williams, he did it again tonight against Indiana as well, but he's a big peripheral stats guy that when he does bring the scoring, the potential for fantasy points is through the roof because of how he can fill up a stat sheet from a points, rebounds, and assist standpoint. So in a game against Illinois where both these teams played a pretty good tempo and it's going to get up and down, even though Bryce Williams didn't have a lot of success against Illinois in the first game, I love the opportunity for a guy who I know can put up peripheral stats. And the fact that he took 12 shots against him in the first game to me is a good sign. Rink Mast actually led the team in shot attempts the first game, though. 22 points, 6 boards. I think he's a pretty good option as well. But I really think when it comes to Nebraska, I'm probably going to stick to those 3 for my primary considerations. Lawrence, Alec, and Gary all have these random ceiling games that you never really know when it's going to come. I don't really know if it's going to happen against Illinois, but to me, you got Tominaga, Williams, and Mast as the 3 guys that I would consider. On the Illinois side, so I've been doing this thing all season long where when I think everybody is going to play Terrence Shannon, I play Marcus Domask. When I think everybody is going to play Marcus Domask, I play Terrence Shannon. And today it really backfired on me. I thought that people were going to be on Shannon in Illinois' game against Ohio State today. They were not. And Shannon was the guy that went off, and I played Domask, and he was not great. So definitely an interesting, trend there that to me, they're kind of hard guys to figure out. But the odds are is that one of those 2 guys is going to go off. And in the first game they played against Nebraska, both of them had a lot of success offensively. Domask, Shannon, and Hawkins all had 18 or more real points. And, they kind of relied on the peripheral stats to determine where the fantasy scoring shook out. But they all 3 had some success offensively. So I do think you can go to all 3 of those guys here in this one as well. From a stacking standpoint, you've got Guerrier there for Illinois, who's playing a ton of minutes and is a solid player, but he's not like the first or second offensive option. So it makes him really hard to get to. And so that's just kind of how I feel about it is I do want to stick to on both of these teams. I want to get to both of their stars. Wait, so I'm seeing in the chat, Tominaga had 39 real points or 39 fantasy points. If he had 39 real points against Indiana, that's a crazy performance. And I would tend to think that he might be able to keep that up. Maybe not 39 again, but hoping that he would be able to keep up his good shooting. Sometimes guys in the gyms that conference tournaments are played in, they get hot one game in a conference tournament and they're able to keep it up and keep going after that. So I do think Tominaga, if he did that well tonight, I didn't get to watch the second half of this game because I was preparing for the live, but if he did end up with 39, that is a guy who you can definitely consider for your lineups. All right, so that does it for all the games that have kind of been decided so far. Don't really have a whole lot else for this Saturday slate. I wish I did. But basically, what we're looking at is this. We've got, a decent size slate where we've got a ton of options, to fill out our lineups with. And hopefully I was able to give you guys all the data necessary that you guys can build your lineups here for this Saturday slate. Pretty much it's still super annoying that we don't have salaries. Now I understand why we don't, because, there's literally still games going on like Charlotte and Temple. I've got on the TV here, and it's not looking great from the 49ers right now, but I'm hoping that Charlotte can pull through in this one, and then we can get salaries hopefully before I go to bed tonight, but we'll see. Either way, when we get the salaries, if you want to get my exact thoughts on the slate, join the Fantasy Corner Discord. We already mentioned it. The link is in the description on YouTube. It's in the description on the audio feed as well. Cannot recommend that enough. I'll be hopping in there tomorrow morning and talk it up and make sure that, we're getting the plays out there, getting the lineups, getting the strategy, and just chopping it up as we always do. And then I'm also going to, for every college basketball slate for now until the rest of the season, I do write an article for my Patreon, patreon.com/MikesMoneyPicks, where I profile my core plays as well as my strategy and my lineup, kind of how I'm going to attack each game and how I'm going to angle each game on the slate. So if you want all of those thoughts, head on over to the Patreon. That is where you can get those. It is a little bit more long form, and that one is not free. That one does come at a charge because I do not write for free. But what the Patreon does is basically, by having a lot of patrons, it allows me to pay for a lot of data that I'm able to get better access to give you guys better content and better articles on the Patreon. So that is that. And yeah, I'm seeing Ryan in the comments. Yeah, isn't that always how it goes when a guy gets hot and then you get on him and then he immediately doesn't get hot? It just always feels that way in DFS. And talking a lot of these games where we've had these teams play each other before, there are times where I swear, if a guy played great against a team the first time, he is either great against him the second time or absolutely terrible against him the second time. Tonight for Oregon, Jermaine Cuisinart, I think is how you pronounce it after watching that game. Cuisinart was great against Arizona in their first meeting, and then he was great against them tonight. But there's so many times where if you just play a guy blindly because he was great against the team the first time, then it's not going to work out. So I do think that is something that you can go by a little bit, but I do like to dive deeper than just the fantasy point total and think about how did he get there? Was his usage right? Were his minutes right? Did he get more shots than he usually gets? Was he more efficient than he usually was? Why did he end up with a big time fantasy total? So that's definitely something that I think I will look at. All right. So with that being said, we've got, about a 50-minute stream here with there being unknowns for the rest of the slate. There's nothing really more I can provide here at the end. If you guys do have any questions or anybody you want to talk about or comment about in the chat, go ahead and fire it in there. But otherwise, we're going to pretty much go ahead and wrap it up. Hopefully, I was able to give you guys plenty of good information to build your lineups. Ryan, Jim, see you guys in the chat. Good luck to you guys as well. Conference championship week has been great for me so far. I have been profitable pretty much every day, not necessarily every slate, but at the end of the day, my account balance is going up, not down when it comes to college basketball. So definitely hoping to keep that up tomorrow. Hopefully I didn't just totally jinx myself, but we got 2 more days, hopefully going to be back here on the live stream tomorrow night to talk about the Sunday slate, because Sunday we are going to have 4 conference championship games as well. Looking forward to that also as we head into selection Sunday. And then I'm hoping to do a live show Sunday night to talk about the bracket, as well as the full bracket breakdown show coming Monday afternoon. So with that being said, y'all, best of luck to you guys on the Saturday slate. Hopefully DraftKings gets these prices out pretty soon so that way we can start making our lineups. But other than that, best of luck to you guys. Thank you guys for watching and hanging out with me. If you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a ton. But other than that, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Best of luck to you guys tomorrow. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.